They laughed at my kids for not having a father, but the moment my son cried in front of the whole class, everything changed, and their parents learned a lesson they would never forget. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Hannah, and I'm a single mom raising 2 kids, Eli who is 8 and little Mia who is 6. We live in a small, quiet suburb where most families look the same: 2 parents, big houses, shiny cars, and more money than they know what to do with. Our life doesn't look like that. I work 2 jobs, sometimes 3 shifts back to back, and most nights I fall asleep on the couch before I even finish my dinner. But no matter how tired I am, I make sure Eli and Mia feel loved. They may not have everything other kids have, but they know they matter. They know I am always there for them. The new school year had just started, and like every mom, I hoped it would be a good one. I ironed their clothes the night before, packed their lunches with little notes inside, and told them how proud I was. They were excited, especially Mia, who loved meeting new people. Eli was quieter, but he tried hard to be brave. But on the very first week, I felt something was off. The looks from some parents were different, longer, sharper, almost judgmental. I heard a few whispers when I walked by, but I ignored them. I had learned to let things slide. People talk. People assume. But I didn't want my kids to feel any of it. I hoped whatever was starting would fade on its own. At pickup, I watched Eli walk out of the building with his shoulders low and his backpack dragging. Mia held his hand tightly like she knew something was wrong. When I asked how their day was, they both forced smiles. I knew those smiles. Kids think they can hide things to protect you, and sometimes they do it better than adults. At home, they tried to focus on homework, but Eli kept staring at the window. He didn't talk much during dinner. Mia stayed close to him, her little fingers rubbing his sleeve over and over. I asked again, gently, but he just said, "It's fine, Mom. I'm okay." He wasn't. I could see it in his eyes. Still, I hoped whatever it was would stop. I hoped the new year would settle in and the kids would make friends like they always tried to. But deep down, something told me this was the start of trouble. Something told me this year would test us in a way we hadn't been tested before. And I had no idea how cruel some people could be until the truth finally unfolded. At school pickup the next day, I was standing near the gate waiting for Eli and Mia when I heard 2 voices behind me. I knew those voices even before I turned. Courtney and Brianna, 2 moms who always walked around like they owned the place. They lowered their voices, but not enough to keep me from hearing every word. "They don't even know who their father is," Courtney whispered with a cold laugh. "No wonder they wear cheap clothes," Brianna added, like she was proud of the insult. My hands tightened around the straps of my bag. For a second, I froze. I wasn't shocked that people like them judged me. What hurt was hearing them talk about my children as if they were problems, as if they were less than other kids. I wanted to turn around and say something, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to cause a scene in front of Eli and Mia. I didn't want to give these women the satisfaction of thinking they got under my skin. When my kids finally walked out, they both waved at me, but their smiles were small. I noticed how Eli kept glancing down at the ground, and Mia stayed close to him, holding his jacket like she was afraid he might drift away. They were trying to be strong. I could see that. But I could also see something new in their eyes, something heavy, something a child should never have to carry. As we walked toward the car, they stayed unusually quiet. Normally, Mia would be talking a mile a minute about what she drew or who she sat with. Eli would tell me about his reading test or how he helped someone in class. But today, nothing. Just silence. I looked at them in the rearview mirror. "Everything okay, you two?" They nodded quickly at the same time, like they had rehearsed it. But I could tell they weren't okay. I could tell the whispers I heard weren't just whispers, they were the start of something spreading through the school like poison. Still, I tried to stay calm. I told myself the school had rules. The teachers would keep things fair. Bullying wasn't taken lightly. Someone would step in if things went too far. But as the days passed, I realized I was wrong. Completely wrong. The teachers didn't notice. The other parents didn't care. And the kids, young as they were, watched their mother's behavior and copied it. Little comments. Little laughs. Small things that grew bigger every day. Eli came home with a drawing torn in half. Mia stopped bringing her favorite pink lunchbox because kids made fun of it for being babyish. They didn't tell me what was happening, but their silence told me more than words ever could. And as much as it hurt, I stayed patient. I thought if I held myself together, the situation would settle. I thought giving it time would help. But the truth was, this was only the beginning. The real damage, the kind that breaks a child from the inside, was just starting to show. A few days later, the school announced new activities for the month, and normally I looked forward to these things. They gave Eli and Mia a chance to feel included, to feel like everyone else. But this time, something felt off from the moment I checked the sign-up sheet. Every child's name was there except Eli's. I thought maybe it was a mistake, so I walked up to the table where Courtney was standing with her perfect smile, pretending to be busy arranging papers. I asked her why Eli's name was missing, and she didn't even bother hiding her attitude. She looked me up and down and said, "Oh, we decided this year's presentations will highlight complete families. You know, mom and dad together. It's the theme we're going for." She said it like it was the most normal thing in the world, like excluding my son was some harmless creative choice. Then she gave me a tight smile and walked away before I could respond. I knew she was the PTA president, but I didn't expect her to use her position to push her personal agenda. Still, I tried to handle things the right way, so I went to Eli's teacher, Mrs. Dalton. I explained what happened and asked her to help make sure Eli wasn't left out. She barely looked at me. She just sighed and said, "Kids tease, it happens. We can't control everything, Hannah. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding." Her tone made it clear she wasn't going to do anything. She didn't even ask Eli how he was feeling. She didn't check the list. She didn't talk to Courtney. She just brushed it off like it was nothing. Like my child being excluded was just normal school behavior. On the way out, I saw Courtney talking to a group of moms. They all turned to look at me at the same time, and the way they whispered told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't random. It wasn't a small misunderstanding. It wasn't kids being kids. It was planned. It was targeted. And it was meant to embarrass us. I could feel the shift happening around me. Invitations that used to come home in folders suddenly stopped. Emails for parents' meetings somehow skipped my inbox. Other moms looked away when I tried to greet them. It felt like someone had flipped a switch and decided my family no longer fit their picture-perfect school image. Eli noticed, too. When the activity day came and he realized he wasn't part of it, he didn't cry. He just sat beside me quietly, watching other kids rehearse with their parents. He didn't say a word, but the silence said enough. Mia sat on my lap and rested her head against my chest like she could feel something was wrong. That night, after they went to bed, I sat in the kitchen replaying everything. The whispers. The missing invitations. Courtney's smirk. Mrs. Dalton's excuses. It wasn't in my head. It wasn't small. For the first time, I realized something darker was happening behind the scenes, something designed to make my kids feel less than everyone else. Something meant to push us out. And I knew it wasn't going to stop on its own. That afternoon, when I heard the front door open, I knew something was wrong before I even saw Eli. His steps were slow, and he didn't call out "Mom, I'm home," like he always did. When he walked into the living room, my heart dropped. His eyes were red and swollen, and he was holding his backpack like it was too heavy for him. A folded piece of paper was crushed in his hand. I went to him right away and gently touched his cheek. "Eli, sweetheart, what happened?" He didn't answer. He just opened his hand and let the paper drop onto the couch. When I unfolded it, I saw his homework ripped down the middle, almost like someone had grabbed it right out of his hands. His handwriting was smudged, like he had been crying while working on it. I knelt in front of him, trying to look him in the eye, but he kept staring at the floor. Mia stood behind him quietly, holding the back of his shirt with her tiny fingers. She looked scared, like she didn't know how to help him but didn't want to leave him alone either. Finally, Eli took a shaky breath, and when he spoke, his voice was so small it broke something inside me. "Mom, they said Dad left because he didn't love us, is that true?" My whole world stopped. I felt like someone had reached inside my chest and squeezed my heart until it hurt to breathe. I pulled him into my arms immediately. He didn't hug me back at first, he just let me hold him, his shoulders shaking as he cried quietly into my shirt. Mia wrapped her arms around both of us, trying to comfort him even though she didn't fully understand. I stroked his hair and whispered, "No, baby. No. That's not true. Not even close." But my voice cracked as I said it, because hearing those words come from my own child, words fed to him by cruel mouths, was something I never thought he'd have to experience. When he finally calmed down enough to speak again, he told me how some kids cornered him after class. How they repeated things they heard their moms say. How they laughed when he tried to walk away. He said he didn't care when they teased him about clothes or lunches. But when they talked about his father, something inside him shattered. I listened to every word, holding back my own tears because he needed me steady. He needed someone to protect him when the world was being unfair. And as he talked, something became painfully clear. The cruelty at school wasn't coming from children just trying to be mean. Kids don't come up with things like that on their own. Those words were planted. Those ideas were taught. It wasn't the children who were hurting my kids. It was the parents who whispered behind my back. The ones who judged our family like it was missing something. The ones who used their own bitterness to poison young minds. That night, after Eli finally fell asleep from exhaustion and Mia curled up next to him like a little guardian, I sat alone in the dark living room. I felt anger rising slowly, burning hotter than anything I had felt before. Not just anger for myself, but for my children, children who never chose this life, who never hurt anyone, who were being punished simply because their father wasn't here. And for the first time, I understood that this wasn't just bullying. It was a planned humiliation, fueled by adults who should have known better. And I knew something had to change. The day of the Family Heroes Day finally came, and I tried my best to make the morning feel normal for Eli and Mia. I packed their lunches, fixed their hair, and hugged them a little longer than usual. Eli held a folded poster in his hands, and I could tell he worked hard on it. He didn't show it to me, but I knew whatever he drew, he put his whole heart into it. I kissed them goodbye and told them I was proud of them no matter what. Later that afternoon, I arrived at the school for the event. Parents were gathered around the classroom, chatting and smiling like everything was perfect. The walls were covered with colorful posters made by the kids, most had drawings of dads in uniforms, suits, or sports clothes. When I spotted Eli's seat, I saw his small hands gripping his poster, waiting for his turn. The teacher called each student one by one. Children went to the front, talking proudly about their fathers. The room was full of claps and cheers. When Eli's name was called, he stood up slowly. Mia squeezed his hand before he walked to the front. He unfolded his poster carefully, and I finally saw it. It was a drawing of me. My hair, my work apron, and a little heart next to my face. Under it, in messy letters, he wrote, "My hero, Mom." Some parents smiled politely, but most stayed quiet. Then I heard the voice I dreaded, Courtney's. She didn't bother lowering her tone this time. "That's sad, imagine not having a real father." A few parents beside her laughed. Their kids heard them and copied the reaction. The sound spread across the room like a wave. The laughter wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut through Eli. He stood there frozen, staring at his own drawing like it suddenly didn't belong to him. I watched his little fingers tremble at the edges of the poster. His shoulders tightened. His lips pressed together like he was trying so hard not to cry in front of everyone. His eyes began to fill, shining with tears he couldn't hold back anymore. The teacher didn't stop the laughter. She didn't say a word. She just stood there, watching. Then it happened. Eli took one shaky breath, held the edge of his poster with both hands, and broke. A deep, painful cry escaped him, one of those cries that doesn't sound like a child's cry at all. It was the kind that comes from hurt that's too heavy, too unfair, too much for someone his age. The entire room went silent instantly. Even the kids who were laughing stared at him, not knowing what to do. Mia ran to him first. She wrapped her arms around his waist, whispering his name over and over. I rushed forward, pushing past a few parents who stepped back awkwardly. When I reached him, he was shaking so hard I could feel it through his shoulders. He didn't try to hide anymore. He cried in front of everyone, crying for the things he lost, for the things he never had, and for the cruelty thrown at him just because his family didn't look like theirs. The silence in the room grew heavy. No one moved. No one laughed anymore. And in that moment, I knew something inside Eli had finally snapped. Not in anger, not in rebellion, but in pure heartbreak. And I also knew this moment would change everything. Eli's cry echoed through the classroom, and for a moment, no one knew how to react. The laughter that had filled the room only seconds earlier died so fast it was like someone had turned off the sound. Even the children who had been giggling now stared at him with wide eyes, shocked by how deeply he was hurting. His whole body shook as he tried to catch his breath, but the tears kept coming, harder and heavier. I held him close, rubbing his back, whispering that he was okay, that I was there, but he could barely hear me through his sobs. When he finally lifted his head, his face was wet and red, and his voice came out small and cracked. I do have a hero, he whispered. She just doesn't look like yours. The room froze. You could have heard a pin drop. Every parent, every child, even the teacher stood still. His words were soft, but they hit the room with a force that none of them expected. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't angry. He was just telling the truth from the deepest part of his heart. Mrs. Dalton, who had ignored every sign of what was happening, stared at Eli like she had never really seen him before. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. It was the first time she looked genuinely stunned, like she finally understood what her silence had allowed to grow. A few kids shifted awkwardly in their seats. One little boy raised his hand and said, "Eli's mom helps everyone. She brought snacks for us last time." Another child nodded and said, "My dad never comes to school stuff. Eli's lucky his mom always comes." Their voices were nervous and shaky, but they were trying. Small defenses, small pieces of kindness pushing through the tension. Mia stood beside her brother the entire time, her arms wrapped around him like she was protecting him from everything in that room. She looked up at the kids, her chin raised, her tiny face fierce. She didn't say a word, but the way she held him said enough. She wasn't letting anyone hurt him again. But then there was Courtney. Instead of feeling even a hint of shame, she rolled her eyes dramatically, loud enough for everyone to notice. She crossed her arms and exhaled sharply like Eli was being dramatic, like his pain was an inconvenience to her perfect day. She even muttered, "Oh, please," under her breath, as if she couldn't stand seeing attention shift away from her own child's poster. Some parents glanced at her, surprised by how cold she still was. Others looked down, uncomfortable. Even Brianna, who always followed Courtney's lead, seemed unsure for the first time. But Courtney didn't stop. She kept her chin high, kept that smug expression like she was immune to guilt. She didn't realize that in that moment, people were noticing her behavior more than anything else in the room. She didn't realize her own words and actions were revealing the truth she had tried to hide behind her pretty smile and PTA title. And she definitely didn't realize that this moment, this single moment of her rolling her eyes at a crying child, was going to lead to her downfall. Her reputation, her influence, her control over the school's parents, everything was about to crumble. She just didn't know it yet. The next morning, I got a call from the school asking me to come in. The principal's voice sounded stiff, formal, like something serious had happened. I arrived as fast as I could, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest. When I walked into the office, I wasn't surprised to see Courtney and Brianna already there, sitting straight-backed with fake worried faces, pretending they cared. Courtney spoke first, acting like she was doing me a favor. "We're concerned about Eli," she said, pressing her hand dramatically to her chest. "He cried uncontrollably yesterday. That's not normal. We think he should see a counselor. He clearly has emotional issues." Brianna nodded quickly, adding, "Kids from unstable homes sometimes struggle more. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Unstable homes. Emotional issues." The way they said those words made my blood boil. They didn't come to help. They came to place the blame on my son, on my family, so they could walk away feeling superior. The principal didn't say anything at first, just glanced between us, waiting for me to respond. I took a deep breath. For years, I kept quiet because I wanted to protect my children from more pain. I didn't want them carrying the weight of their father's story until they were old enough to understand it fully. But standing there, watching these women use their ignorance to hurt my child, something inside me finally snapped. Not in anger, but in clarity. I stood up straighter, looked Courtney directly in the eye, and said, "My husband didn't abandon us." The room went silent. Even the principal leaned forward. I continued, my voice steady, but the words heavy. "He was a firefighter. He died in the line of duty saving 2 children from a burning house." I paused, letting the truth settle. My kids didn't lose a father. They lost a hero. The air in the room shifted instantly. Courtney's mouth fell open just slightly, like she didn't know what to do with the truth she never bothered to ask about. Brianna's eyes widened, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked genuinely ashamed. The principal sat back slowly, absorbing every word. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was just done letting people rewrite my family's story. "My son cried yesterday," I said quietly, "not because he's unstable, but because adults in this school taught their children to mock something they didn't understand." The principal swallowed hard. Courtney tried to speak, but her voice cracked. We didn't know." I didn't let her finish. "You didn't ask," I said. "You didn't care to." The room was so quiet it felt like no one was breathing. All their assumptions, all their gossip, all their whispered judgments collapsed under the truth they never imagined. For the first time, they looked at me not with pity, not with fake smiles, but with the realization that they had crossed a line they could never uncross. The same woman they mocked for being alone, for working 2 jobs, for having kids without a father in sight, was actually the widow of a man braver than any of them. And in that moment, everything changed. Hannah never expected the truth to spread so quickly, but once it did, everything changed. It started with a few whispers in the hallway, then parents talking in the parking lot, and soon the whole school community knew what had really happened. People who once smiled at Courtney and Brianna now looked at them with disappointment and anger. They couldn't believe how cruel they had been to a family who had already suffered so much. Other mothers began asking questions. They wanted to know why Courtney had allowed her daughter to bully Eli and Mia for so long. They also questioned why she had tried to hide everything behind fake concern. The more people learned, the angrier they became. It wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about a pattern of behavior that had gone too far. PTA members started stepping down. They didn't want to be associated with Courtney's circle or the image she had created for herself. Some even apologized to Hannah privately, admitting they should have noticed what was happening much earlier. Sponsors who supported school events withdrew their funding because they didn't want their names linked to any form of bullying. In just a few days, Courtney's perfect image cracked, then completely fell apart. Mrs. Dalton, who had ignored the bullying and allowed things to worsen, couldn't avoid the consequences either. The school board opened an investigation into her actions. Parents demanded answers, wanting to know why she had not protected an innocent child. For the first time, Mrs. Dalton had to face the weight of her choices. Through all of this, Hannah remained calm. She didn't argue, she didn't shout, and she didn't try to embarrass anyone. She simply told the truth when she needed to and focused on her children. She never wanted revenge, and she never asked for anyone to take sides. But once the truth was out, everything else happened on its own. People chose for themselves who was right and who was wrong. Hannah watched as the same people who once judged her now defended her family. She didn't take pleasure in Courtney's downfall, but she felt a quiet sense of relief. Maybe now, Eli and Mia would finally have the peace they deserved. Maybe now, people would think twice before hurting someone who was already trying their best to stay strong. And for the first time in a long while, Hannah felt a little hope return. After the events at the school, things began to change in ways Hannah had never imagined. The school district issued a public apology to her and her children. They admitted they had failed to protect Eli and Mia and recognized the cruelty that had been allowed to happen. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to Hannah, knowing that the system finally acknowledged the truth. Not long after, the school announced a big change. The annual Family Heroes Day would now be called Community Heroes Day. The focus shifted from just fathers or traditional family structures to honoring all types of families and the people who make a difference in children's lives. Hannah felt a mix of relief and pride. Her family, once mocked and belittled, was now part of something meaningful and inclusive. Soon, she was invited to speak at the school about her experiences. She shared her story of strength, loss, and raising her children as a single parent. She talked about the pain of losing her husband, the struggles of working multiple jobs, and the courage it took to keep going for Eli and Mia. The parents listened quietly, some nodding, some wiping away tears. It wasn't just about the tragedy, it was about hope, resilience, and the love that holds a family together. Eli, who had been quiet and withdrawn for so long, began to show a new confidence. At school, he spoke up during class discussions, helped other kids with their work, and even smiled more freely. Mia, inspired by her brother's courage and her mother's strength, became protective and bold. She no longer allowed other children to tease her brother or herself and often stood up for her friends as well. The community began to see them differently. People who had once judged Hannah now approached her with respect, asking for advice, or simply acknowledging how strong her family was. Parents who had been skeptical or cold started including Eli and Mia in activities without hesitation. Teachers treated them with fairness and attention. For the first time, the children felt truly seen, not as kids from a broken family, but as brave, capable, and full of potential. Hannah felt a quiet satisfaction as she watched her children thrive. The fear, the whispers, and the cruelty that had once followed them seemed to fade. It wasn't revenge that brought change, it was honesty, love, and the community finally realizing the truth. The rise wasn't just for Hannah. It was for Eli and Mia too. They learned that courage doesn't always come from power or wealth, but from standing strong in the face of unfairness. And in that small suburb, a family once mocked for what they didn't have was now celebrated for everything they truly were, loving, strong, and unbreakable. The story of that school year came to an end, but the lesson stayed with all of us. Hannah stood in front of the audience one last time, her children by her side, and spoke with a calm, steady voice that carried more strength than anyone could ignore. She didn't need to shout or accuse, the truth spoke for itself. Never judge a family by what it's missing, she said, her eyes sweeping across the room. Judge it by the love it has. They mocked my kids for not having a father, but they forgot one thing. A hero doesn't leave us when he dies, he lives in the strength we carry forward. The room was silent. Parents, teachers, and even students listened, many with tears in their eyes. Hannah's words weren't just about her family, they were about every child who had been judged unfairly, every parent who had worked tirelessly to protect them, and every family that society had misunderstood. Eli and Mia stood tall beside their mother. Eli's confidence had grown so much that he held his poster from Community Heroes Day proudly, pointing to the heart where he had drawn his mom. Mia, small but fierce, kept her arm around her brother's shoulders, a little protector ready to face the world with him. They no longer hid behind fear or shame. They had learned to walk with pride, carrying the love and courage that had always been inside them. As the applause began, Hannah felt a wave of relief and quiet triumph. The parents who had once whispered cruel words now clapped with understanding. The teachers who had turned their heads finally acknowledged their mistakes. Even the students who had laughed at Eli and Mia now looked at them differently, recognizing bravery over appearances. Hannah knew that nothing could erase the past, but she also knew that how her family responded to it defined their future. They were not victims. They were survivors. They had taken humiliation and turned it into honor, showing the entire community that strength comes from love, not labels or assumptions. The family walked out of the school that day together, shoulders squared, hearts full, and heads held high. The whispers, the judgment, and the cruelty that once seemed so loud had faded into nothing. What remained was a family stronger than before, a mother proud of her children, and children proud of their mother. Hannah glanced at Eli and Mia, smiling through the tears that threatened to fall. She knew that life would continue to have challenges, but the most important lesson had been learned: love and courage outweigh fear and cruelty. The world could judge them, but it could never take away what they had inside. And as they left the school grounds, the sun shining on their faces, it was clear to everyone watching that this family had not just survived, they had risen. They had shown what it meant to be brave, to be resilient, and to carry a hero's spirit forward in every step they took. Their story ended not with sadness, but with strength, hope, and a quiet, undeniable victory.